Welcome to a Leader's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Joel Gunn, and today we have back with us my co-host, Brent Fessler.
Yay.
Dr. Brent Fessler.
Yay. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so before the show, we were talking about topics. We'll probably record another one or two of these in the next month or so, but you said you want to do trauma-induced leadership.
So close, not trauma-induced leadership or trauma-producing leadership. I was going more for trauma-informed leadership.
Trauma-informed leadership. Yeah. Well, there is a lot of trauma-induced leadership.
Well, yeah, we don't need
leaders that induce trauma.
We don't need much coaching to induce more trauma in the workplace. It's already happening plenty.
That's a good point. All right, so scratch the trauma-induced leadership.
Yeah.
Now I have to redo my titling.
Yeah, oh well.
All right, so what are your thoughts around non-trauma-induced leadership?
Yeah, so maybe I'll back up a little bit. I love how God takes us through different things in our life, different chapters that seem separate and disconnected from other things, and somehow way down here, he brings them together and turns it into a beautiful, valuable thing. For us, my wife Kirsten and I, that really goes back to when we first felt called to adopt. And so when we dove in to the adoption world, we were honestly naive, but very well intentioned, and I think had a lot of faith and hope in our motivations to do it, but feeling and believing that much more instead of the nature mindset, the nurturing mindset, where you can bring anybody into the right environment and they will thrive and flourish just like anybody else. So basically it's kind of a pride thing, really. You feel like, oh, you can give me that troubled kid, or you give me that troubled situation, and we can handle it. And so, I'm sure there was a lot of, God's probably one of them who was chuckling during that. But the journey getting, and the reason why I bring this up is because by definition, anyone, and adoption is just full of trauma, right? So you cannot get through an adoption without there being trauma. You're talking about something has gone wrong, right? If you are in the situation of adoption. And so I know we're talking about trauma-informed leadership, and we'll get there in a second. This is how we got there. And in learning that when you invite somebody who's from a broken situation, there's a lot of brokenness that comes with them. And it's not just, I wouldn't call it baggage. It's really a brokenness. And as we got into it in our family, we realized it's not that some people have trauma and some people don't. We realized everyone is on that spectrum. And there were things that we discovered about ourselves that we would never have seen had we not seen it in a loud way in our own home through that. And it wasn't just with our adopted child, it was also with the extended adoptive family and being around that. And so it's kind of like when we watch a sitcom, right? A sitcom is an exaggerated version of reality. It's funny, not because it's inaccurate. It's funny because it's accurate, but it's done in such a loud way. Like the reason why we laugh at a sitcom is because, like if you ever watch Everybody Loves Ray, like most people I talk to that watch Everybody Loves Ray, it's like, oh, that's my family, right? It's not everybody's family, but they see elements of their family in that because
it's definitely my family. That's why I can't watch it.
That's right. Yeah.
Christina, my wife thought that was one of the funniest shows ever. It was painful. It's like there's too many similarities.
It's painfully funny, right? And life at work, hopefully it can be painfully funny as well, right? Because there's difficulties and challenges at work that hopefully at some point we get to laugh at. But the reality is they're difficult. And so going through that, as we learned to love in broken situations better, to lead as parents better, we learned about trauma, and that was the essential of it. We learned about quite a few things, which we can go into today, and I'd love to maybe double click on those, but to give the backstory and how we got to this place of using this term. I don't know if it's a made up term. It's a mashup term, trauma-informed leadership. For us, it started going through this adoption journey where we really learned about trauma in general and realized that there's not these people over here have trauma and these people don't. We all do. And we've learned that there is better ways to lead, better ways to love, better ways to communicate, better ways to have relationship. And really the essence of getting through any relational challenges is really dealing with breaches of trust, difficulties, the essence of trauma.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, did you have to wrestle with? You touched on this, but as you wrestled through some of this, you and your wife probably started to recognize, hey, we've got trauma we have to deal with. What was that journey like?
So one of the things that you discover with trauma, and there's kind of some key elements of it. When we call it flipping our lid, right? And you get to, we especially now have some new knowledge, relatively new knowledge about brain science and neuroscience. But we've used the term flipping our lid for a long time. Flipping our lid is when we get into a fight, flight, or freeze mode, right? So when we feel threatened, when we feel unsafe, we all have this threshold, right?
Mm.
Every one of us has this. It's something in the way the brain starts working is the amygdala, which is at the base of the brain, starts firing adrenaline and things that focus all the blood on the muscles so that you can run away from danger or so that you can fight danger. But what that does is it takes all the blood away from the prefrontal cortex, which is the executive function section of the brain. That's where all of our decision making happens. That's where all of our high level reasoning happens. So much of our language is happening there. And that's why in a moment of frustration, like where you're mad at somebody and you just like, you want to fight them. And then as soon as you walk away, you start thinking of all the things that you should have said,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you couldn't think in the moment. You couldn't make good decisions, but you can fight. And so we all have that threshold. But when we are in trauma or have experienced trauma ends up reducing that threshold, whether it be from the battlefield, PTSD, from where we have this reduced level of like things set us off.
Mm-hmm.
Or it would be from a financial background, socioeconomic shortages, abuse, neglect, and even drug, fetal alcohol syndrome, and those types of things. All of those things, one of those things that it does is it reduces that threshold. So smaller things set off being in fight, flight, or freeze mode. And my wife and I would joke around because you do have to find humor and find joy in these things. And since it's fight, flight, or freeze, that's the effing situation. And so we have talked about, hey, there's an effing kid at home because they're in fight, flight, or freeze mode. Mm-hmm. And so it's like our warning. Hey, just let you know there's an effing kid at home. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh man, I don't like effing kids. And what do you do with effing kids? And people that are around us are like, what in the world are you talking? They're about to call CPS or whatever. But it extends into the workplace too. When you have effing employees, it is those moments where you have people on the team that are in survival mode. Mm. They're in protection mode. Mm-hmm. They're not thinking logically. The prefrontal cortex is shut down. They can't solve problems. They can't be creative in the things that they're trying to do. They're thinking more about self-preservation. Mm-hmm. And so I'm thinking, how can I preserve myself, diminish you, either run away, injure somebody else? And that's why we get these damaging situations. We like to use nice terms like dysfunction or things like that, but it can stem from it can stem from this being in a unsafe environment or an perceived. It doesn't even have to be real. So that's. Let me pause for a second with that. It doesn't need to be a real danger. That's the thing. When you have, especially somebody who's experienced trauma, they get into the survival mode when they don't need to be. And there's no real danger. If they experience food shortage, right, they end up hoarding food when there's a full pantry, right? Mm-hmm. It's not a logical behavior. It's just this this drive that the amygdala is firing on these things. Or there's this overly zealous argument like you bring up any kind of correction and I see it as an attack. And so I don't think logically about it like there's something to learn here.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, I just preserve myself and I fight back and I argue back. And that happens in the workplace, right? It's people who quickly just fire off an email or slam a door, or sometimes bosses that fire people, is right on a regular basis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they just lose their temper, they flip their lid. But so that's the effing, the fight, flight, or freeze mode. That's one of the key things to understand, that we are all on that spectrum, right? We all have that threshold, and we can all go past it in certain situations. And some of the things that cause us to go past it, it's a complex factor thing that messes with that threshold. So if you're tired, this is for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
If you're tired, that threshold gets lower, right? We all know that we lose our temper more when we're tired, right? We see our kids at home, they get cranky, or the other one is food, blood sugar level. We call it hangry sometimes, right? You get in a bad mood just because your blood sugar levels are not where they need to be. And so rest and blood sugar levels. The other thing is just noise, things like noise. Noise, like if you've been at a theme park all day, or you've been at a noisy gathering, a networking event, and you've been working really hard to understand somebody, all those things start reducing that threshold, and then things can just trigger it, right? It means that you're not in a place to be high performing. So when our teams are in these places where their threshold is threatened, right, that we're dangerously close to going over this threshold, something goes wrong, puts them over, right? Or something is said in the wrong way or interpreted in the wrong way, puts them over. And you think that is not the environment that we want our teams in if we need them to be high performing, which we all do, right? We all need our teams to be high performing. That's our we're betting, we're wagering, we're hoping, needing our teams to be high performing for us to be able to be profitable, for us to deliver on our outcomes. Because so often we're doing hard things at work. And so we need our teams to be high performing, yet so many of our teams are living dangerously close or perpetually over this fight, flight, or freeze survival threshold, which means they tend to be in survival mode, and they are not going to be in their prefrontal cortex is not going to be working at its best that we need them to be. Emails are not going to be written well. Solutions are not going to be seen. Teamwork is not going to be happening. Trust absolutely is not happening, right? And when we look at like Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, like number one, trust, right? So your team will be dysfunctional if you have many of your members living close to these threshold, the survival threshold. And I kind of in a nutshell, I mean, that is trauma-informed leadership. And then there's some other things, but yeah.
Are people that are constantly exposed to, and I'm going to use the word stress, trauma, may be synonymous here or not, and you can unpack why if not, but are people that are constantly at that threshold able to operate more normally, like they get comfortable in that, versus let's say they get further down the road, they've recognized they've actually backed off to where there's a lot less trauma or stress in their life, and then they're triggered more easily. Is there such a thing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of analogs to physical strength and conditioning and things like that. So over time, we can change our threshold, and there's a few things to do. One, we can be aware of the factors and be more aware that I'm getting close to my own survival threshold. And if one of the markers of maturity is that I can self-regulate, I don't need others to regulate for me or to co-regulate, right? So when you have a child, you're regulating for them to start off with. They don't know when they're hungry. They don't know what to do when they're in a bad mood. We have to regulate as parents for them. As they grow up, we're kind of co-regulating. Hey, bud, want a snack? things like that. Like, hey, I noticed you're a little bit down. Maybe you need a snack, or maybe you need some more rest. So we start to help co-regulate with them. But one of the markers of maturity is that I'm now self-aware when I'm crossing my own threshold, and as I do that, I'm more responsible for it. So that's some of the things that we can do as leaders, is to help bring more awareness to our team so that they can self-regulate themselves. And so that's, I think one side. I need to be, especially as a leader, I have to be more responsible than anybody else in the organization for my own threshold. I have to be the one. I have to be the last one in the building that's going to cross that survival threshold and flip my lid and anybody. And I think there's, especially in decades past, there's almost a badge worn when I cross my threshold. It's like, I'll let them have it today. I let them know that I meant business. And it's almost like I need to cross my threshold to be a good leader. Right? I mean, it's like, you think of that fallacy of like, I need to lose my temper with my team every once in a while so they know I mean business. Right? And we think that's a sign, and at least in years past. Hopefully we're more informed now. That says that, actually that backfires. It puts people in that survival mode, and what they do, maybe they won't argue anymore, but it's not because they've actually heard you. And some of especially in the parenting research, when someone is in a flipped lid, in that F-ing, that fight, flight, or freeze mode, they retain something like 10%, right? Compared with something more like 70 or 80%. So think about what we're trying to do when our lid is flipped. We're trying to correct something. We're trying to move something. And we have ourselves in the least effective mode with our team or with our kids that they could possibly be in. And often we escalate in that, which causes them to shut down even more. So we're feeling good because we're trying to bring correction, right? And none of it is getting through, because their lids are flipped. Though I'm in a fight mode, they're probably more in a freeze mode. Right? We see that where I'll comply with anything just to get you to shut up, right? Just to get you to appease you. I didn't actually learn or grow or strengthen a relationship or anything. In fact, there was more damage done than anything. And over time, those become very dysfunctional organizations, and people don't stay. People don't want to work in places like that, and they leave. So that's the one thing, is our self-awareness of it. On the other side, I need to also be aware of pick up on cues when your lid's about to flip. And I can be responsible to not push and press, right? To see, and actually you and I have worked close enough together where we're a little bit sensitive to each other's lids, right? Where we've both made, hey, it's time to let's go grab lunch, or hey, let's go down the hall and listen to some music, right? Or whatever it is that as a great leader can sense, now's not the time to push. And this is probably one of the hardest things, I'll say, at least for me. And I know this is true for a lot of people, but maybe not everybody. There is a real issue to correct. And it might even be somebody lied, right? Somebody's not telling the truth and they're lying to my face. But if I can tell that their lid is flipped, I can understand that there is no logic on the planet that's going to get us through this conversation to the right place where it needs to go. Because logic is gone, the amygdala is firing, the prefrontal cortex is gone. It has left the building. The lid is flipped. So there's no point in actually getting to a correct place. The only thing we can do is get to a connected place. And so what some of the remedies to this, some of the techniques and the strategies, and some of the sayings that we can adopt ourselves, is you connect before you correct, right? And sometimes we think of things like relational bank accounts or things. You got to deposit some connection before we make a withdrawal of correction, and that's true. But especially in the moment, in these acute situations where somebody's lid is flip, it is completely pointless and worthless to try to just, at that point, logic your way, argue your way, and set up, even if you're completely right, to logic your way to the correction. because what is needed is just to get back to connection. There's some keys to go to that. Do we feel heard? Right. So that's why customer service often say, start asking an irate customer questions so that they can feel that their voice is heard. They naturally start calming down when I feel that I am being heard, right? That I'm seen, that I'm valued. Are my needs met? What do you need? What is the real need right here? Because the real need is not to be correct. There's something else going on that, hey, is it simple as you need a break? Hey, let's go grab a snack. Or let's pick this up tomorrow. Simple things like that. And this is where it's hard because you know that there's something broken and wrong that needs to be corrected, and it does. But it's pointless to try to correct it in moments like that. Instead, if we can pause as leaders or as parents in the situation to connect and to rebuild, help get things back in, build the trust, build the relationship, it's only in that space of connection that we can then correct and move forward.
Isn't it tempting then to just justify, well, I don't want to take that hard action. I just need to let them calm down and we'll do this another day. And then you just kick the can down the road. How do you avoid that temptation of, because a lot of leaders don't like,
touchy-feely.
We know a lot of great leaders that they don't want to fire people.
Yep.
Right. And so it's just easier to kick the problem down. Well, let's all sleep on it. Let's address this tomorrow.
Right.
Reviews are coming up in 3 months. We'll talk about it then.
So that is definitely a challenge. That's a growth area to get into as a leader. How do I balance intention, the connection and the correctness, the correction, right? You've got to deliver a product. There's things that have to be right. Sometimes we're in compliance situations where we cannot, or life and death, safety situations, right? We cannot tolerate mistakes. We cannot tolerate errors in those things. So how do you then build the relationship and in those places and still have the quality, the excellence, or the rigorous outcomes? And so that's something that every leader has to figure out in the situation that they're in. That said, I've had to separate from a team member before, and still had that team member thanking me, especially in days to come, and have a very good and healthy relationship with that member because they appreciated the connection, the relationship, still feeling valued, seen, and heard, even in a changing relationship. Now, that doesn't always work, right? Because that is, I can't make you receive anything. I can't make you feel anything. I have to own mine. That's, Henry Cloud's one of the best at boundaries and understanding this, where my boundaries are. I own my emotions completely. And this is, by the way, another the trauma thing, another trauma piece that we can jump into a second. But I can't guarantee that this interaction is going to work out, right? That you're a free will, you're a free agent, not a free agent, but your agency is intact, right? And for me to think that this is like back to us going through adoption, right? Thinking that we had all the power to change somebody's life was a fallacy. They still have to choose to come into relationship. They still have to choose to receive love and compassion, input, and all these things. And sometimes the choice just doesn't go through, right? They refuse to do it. It's true. When I was in education, we saw that happen all the time, where we would try to create as much environment, as much support as possible. But if the student chooses to not engage, there's nothing we can do about it, right? I mean, we can continue to communicate, we can continue to reach out, we can continue to do those things, but we can't grab somebody and get inside their head, tell them to believe something, tell them to think something, right? That is a boundary you can never cross. And I want to say too, like while we're there talking about agency and boundaries, one of the things that trauma can do is blame everything else. And so people who come from a place of trauma often project the blame for their situation. And this is a universal thing. We all do this, right? We all project blame for our situation on everyone else. But sometimes people in trauma are louder about it, so I can see it more readily in their life. And so how do you come and help somebody who's in a ditch and they're blaming everybody else for being in the ditch, right? And I think one of the leadership principles, not just principle, like life principle, that Jesus taught us was in the parable of the Good Samaritan. Right? Jesus was asked, well, who's my neighbor? If you tell me to love my neighbor, who's my neighbor? And so in that situation, the Samaritan came upon this person who was injured and in a ditch. They'd been robbed, so they were in a ditch. The other two people had come along, same road, but they did not get into the ditch with that person, right? But the Samaritan is the one who did. And so we can get in a ditch with somebody. We can stay outside the ditch and explain what's going on all day long, right? We can understand it all day long, but to reach somebody who's in a place of trauma, you do have to come towards them. And that said, though, they still have to choose to go on the journey with you. But they're much more likely to start receiving the compassion when somebody comes towards them. So I can come towards somebody, be in the ditch with them, and understand them in their life situation if I feel like that's something that I can do, have the capacity to do, capability to do. Yet that may not be a person that I put in charge of a team, right? So I think that's where we navigate as a leader. How do I manage my team and put people who are ready in the moment in those positions? Because sometimes we put somebody who's not ready because they haven't work through building up some of these character things or some of working to regulate their own trauma, and we put them in a situation. Now all of a sudden it's higher stress, and they end up failing because we put them in a place where they just weren't equipped or weren't ready for. So knowing that those are different things. I can understand you as a person, but if I put you in a leadership role or a professional role that you're not ready for, I'm not doing you a favor either. So we think in our businesses we can list our capabilities, right? We may have a particular marketing and sales capability. We might have a particular tech capability, particular product. We think about what can we do? What do we have the capacity to do? How much of this can we do? And I think it would be interesting to be a trauma-informed leader and a trauma-informed organization would be to add to the list of our capabilities that we are intentional about growing and developing is understanding people well, developing them, understanding what trauma looks like, and treat that as something that we can grow into. Okay, right now, I cannot handle this mess, this brokenness. And the only thing that we can do as an organization, because I have to steward this organization, that's a tension. I'm responsible for this company and this outcomes. And I'm responsible for you, but not in the same way I'm responsible for the overall company. So I have to know when I don't have capacity or capability to work with this person who's broken and have them be functional in the team. So the thing that we have to do is separate. I may still maintain a relationship with you, but I want to learn from this because the next time I was close to making this work. So what do I need to learn as a leader that next time I'm in this situation, I have a better chance of having this person grow and develop and flourish in our organization rather than us being so narrow. The only people who can flourish in my organization happen to be people who are just super high performing and they come in. We need to hire good people, right? But think of the limitations that we limit ourselves to when the capability of our company is completely restricted to what I'm able to hire. If I can develop, if I can even bring healing, right? Bring people who can be lifted and raised, developed, grown while they're at my organization, all of a sudden I have a much larger pool of people to reach. One of those things could be understanding people in recovery, right? So if I can understand recovery better as a leader, now there's such a large part of our population that is in recovery, whether it be from drugs or alcohol or gambling or whatever it is, and it can often make it impossible in the moment, at least, to have people like that on the team because of dysfunction or because of trauma. It's the same type of things. As I get better as a leader to understand that, now I can invite people like that onto the team and have success with them. And what what the data tends to show is that people who can do that well, teams who can do that well, those people who've been through recovery, Jesus said to him, to whoever has been much forgiven, I'm going to botch this up, so paraphrase it. If you've been forgiven a lot, you are so much more grateful, right? And so you have people who are so much more grateful and passionate about their work because of what they've been through, and they know what they've come out of, and they now come in much more passionate, much more loyal. But sometimes to get somebody like that onto the team means I have to have expanded my own capability and capacity as a trauma-informed leader to understand those people.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned a moment ago about selecting people, bringing them on the team, building better teams. This thought came to me, we have all our cliches of what kind of person you're looking for. If you're in a volunteer organization, I'm looking for somebody that's faithful, available, and teachable as one of the standards that people use. You're introducing another aspect, which is somehow discerning where they are in their ability to handle trauma or have been through trauma or matured more than most, or not even sure how to phrase that. But first of all, if you could help with some wording around that thought. And then secondly, how would somebody, one of the viewers or listeners of the podcast, how would they start to pay attention to that in the interview process? How do they uncover that?
So I think some of the words that we've put around it in the past are things like emotional intelligence, where I'm aware of my emotions and some of those things. I don't know that that's like the most descriptive kind of a term.
Not in line to what we're talking about here.
No, but really what it is it starts. So metacognition would be probably the best like academic and psychological term to talk about. So metacognition is two parts. It's first a self-awareness of my own thoughts and my actions. So that's that I'm aware of myself. The second is then regulating those thoughts. So true metacognition has two parts. It's an awareness and then a regulating of it. Mm-hmm. So somebody who's, and I wouldn't use, hey, are you good at metacognition? But trying to put some words about what am I looking for? I'm looking for somebody who's very self-aware of their emotions, but their where their threshold is, where they're at. And that includes not just, man, is my lid about to be flipped? It's more like, I'm hungry, I need rest, and I'm getting myself rest, right? That's the regulating part now. So I'm treating myself well. I'm resting well. I am taking ownership and agency for my emotions. Some cues that you can be listening for are how does learning happen? Where does blame happen? So like a typical interview question can be, talk to me about a time of conflict and how you help resolve it, or one of the challenging situations at work, right? Some generic question like that. And what are we listening for in there? Well, often we're listening for like problem solving skills. You're listening for, are they smart? Can they get through difficult things? Well, I'm also listening for, where are they putting blame on things? And where are they projecting all the blame for something, and where are they learning? Like I'm listening for their own learning process in this, and their ownership of that process, whether they have been a leader or a follower in it. Even if they're talking about, you ask somebody, tell me about a mentor that's impacted your life. And they often just talk about the concepts that they've learned in there. I want to be listening for, what did they do to engage with a mentor? Because often we focus just on training mentors. And as an educator, and what I tell my kids, is the world is full of mentors. If you're a good mentee, you will never be without a mentor. The person mentoring you may not even know that they're your mentor. Mm-hmm. And so when we are hungry for growth, have a growth mindset, there's a humility that goes with that. It's not a punitive kind of humility where I'm just a worm and I'm no good. But humility starts with that self-awareness. I have an accurate understanding, big picture where I'm at, instantaneously where I'm at. So I think that's some of that. As the self-awareness and the regulation of it. and you're looking for, even from a fractal sense, looking at long-term self-awareness and even in the moment, right? So we often think of something like character. If you're looking for a person with character, that character is kind of static, or at least really slowly changing. I would say our character is, yes, it has a long-term like capacity, strength to it, kind of like our physical strength does, right? Am I stronger today than I was, 3 months ago? There's that kind of long-term thing. Well, that's measured by maybe if I go max out in the gym, how many bench presses can I do at a certain weight, or that type of thing. But there's also the instantaneous character, the instantaneous, and that's also an awareness. Do I know what I can handle right now in this moment? And that's not like, oh, I'm gonna just kind of put down on the sheet, this is where I'm at. It's like I'm constantly aware in the moment, like I'm not feeling like I can regulate and be high performing right now. What do I need to go and do about that? Those are the high performers who are self-regulating that, not waiting on somebody else to tell them how to go and take care of themselves. So we talk about self-care, which is often just, go get a massage or mani-pedi or something like that, but really self-care. And this is what I'd be looking for in team members, are people that are very self-aware and good at taking care of themselves, keeping themselves in a high-performing state, knowing when I need a break, knowing when I need to rest, get the blood sugar, to go learn, to go take a break. You mentioned earlier that it seems like a compromise when we just say, let's just cool off, right? And that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes you just need just give me some time, give me some space, let everything cool off, and then you can come back. So people who know, right? I would get in heated moments at home sometimes, and I needed my wife Kirsten to co-regulate with me. She'd be like, "Hey, Brent, it's time for a timeout." And like the last thing that I want, right?
Well, because you're fully engaged in fight mode.
You're fully engaged.
You're about to win.
Fully engaged in fight mode. And so you asked about how do we grow into these things. This is an incredible area of growth opportunity. When your lid is flipped, can you get back into a green zone, right? And be aware my lid is flipped and I somehow have the cues in place that I can disengage from this moment, even though everything in me is screaming, I need to fight and win right now, in a physical way, raising my voice. How do I get out of that moment right now? This is a sign of maturity, and this is a thing to develop and grow into. Can I walk away from that kind of a moment, right? When everything in me is yelling and screaming, go and get quiet, breathe, take a deep breath, go and pray, go and do whatever I need to do to get that adrenaline to come back to normal, get back to thinking, get back to real me, right? That's like, after those moments, who's ever proud of those moments, right? I mean, you're like, I can't believe I did that. Can't believe the words that I said. It's like you're on a drug, right? And people, when they're drunk, like, I said what? It's like we're on drug, or we're drugged in those moments. We do things we regret. We do things we can't take back. They're injurious. They're hurtful. So that, looking for that in my team, but that's also something that a leader has to develop.
We were talking a minute ago about how do you identify this with somebody you're adding to your team, and you mentioned something that triggered a question. I've done hundreds of interviews in my career, and one I think may work here, and I wanted to bounce it off you, is you start talking about, well, why'd you leave the last organization, or what was your experience like at the last organization? And if it's, well, my boss was a jerk, my coworkers were a jerk, there was all these problems, there's all these issues.
The last 5 organizations were like that.
And I'm like, well, what about the one before that? Same.
Same.
One before that, same. So, and usually you can uncover that pretty quickly, even if they put on the false, like, oh no, it was a great place to work. oh, okay, well, that's, why'd you leave then? And, pretty quickly, most people, because it is an emotional thing, and they want to be right.
Right.
If they're not mature, I think was the word used a few times. If they're not mature in this way, it's very easy for them to step back into that emotion. And during the interview, they're actually reliving it.
Yeah.
And so basically, it betrays their own past is betraying them right there in the moment. And it's like, I really want somebody that's that. But I liked what you said. If as a leader you can learn to help those people, like knowingly, okay, I know this is where this guy's limit is.
Yeah.
I've been able to coach people through that before, and I see the potential in this person.
Yeah.
They're going to be a lot more loyal.
So I'm looking for examples where they allowed that to happen, where they allowed a mentor, a leader, somebody to speak in their life, bring some coaching, right? So when you think, are they coachable? We like to say, are somebody coachable?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't just mean submissive. It means, are they humble enough to be, so like one of the primary things that a coach does is create a more accurate picture of reality, right? One of the primary things that a coach does is be a mirror and bring a more accurate reflection of what this person's actually in, right? A coach is hardly ever better at something, right? When we think in athletics, it's not the best person on the team who's the coach, right? They're the worst, right? They can't go out there on the floor, and do better than anybody else. But they're the ones who create the most accurate picture of what's really going on. And not just that, but create the most accurate now vision of who you actually are, right? So a coach says, here's the reality of what's really going on, and here's the reality of who you need to be in this. Can you in an interview, can you tease out somebody's capacity, willingness to be coached in a situation like that? And I think you can listen for things like even trying to bring, an accurate picture of something, right? Of, well, could it have been, this type? What if it was this type of situation? What would you have done? And if you see them continue to go on trajectory, because I like to look at trajectory rather than just position. I'll take trajectory over position any day, because trajectory is more powerful. It's a multiplicative thing. When somebody has a good trajectory, they may be way back here, but in just a little while they can be there. Whereas somebody in a particular position may be flat and they're contagious in their attitude and things. So looking for things that what kind of a trajectory can I deduce in an interview to understand how coachable somebody is, knowing that it is easier to regulate in a new public situation. So like when you're being introduced to somebody that you've never met before, it's easier to regulate with that person than when you think about, I'm at home, I'm around my friends, I can be myself, right? It's not really ourself that we're being. It's our laziness to stop regulating and being the person we know we're supposed to be, right? When we're around people that we could get or in a situation where we could be embarrassed, I'm now supported basically by that potential for embarrassment to regulate well, right? And I know this is just while I'm thinking about it. That's why I love in a workspace having windows, having openness, because the more visibility that we have, even physical visibility, the better we will tend to regulate, right? Because I know people are watching. The more opportunity I have to see myself, and so I mentioned awareness before.
So before you go there,
yeah.
So the best place for me to sit is 2 walls are windows and 2 walls are mirrors.
Okay.
And it's open and I can see myself.
Open and I can see myself. That's correct. Yes. So let's design new workspaces. It'll be the Joel Gunn workspace phenomenon.
I could write books.
You can write books about it. Yeah. And so there's data around this, right? And there's it was actually, we're kind of around Halloween time. It was a Halloween experiment from the late 70s. They put out a bowl of candy, and they watched the subject come in, and there's a sign that says only take one. And they measured how many kids or how many people took more than one. and we're dishonest about it. The rate was approximately 28%. I remember the day. It was either 24. It was 28%. The next experiment situation, same, except they put a mirror next to the bowl, right? So please just take one, and now there's a mirror. The only difference is I'm reaching into this bowl, and I see myself as I'm reaching into this bowl. And the rate dropped from 28% who took more than they were supposed to down to 14%. So it cut in half, right? Significant, right? It's not just like, oh, there's like 5 point difference. It was cut in half. And then the third case was where they now had the mirror and then also required the person to say their name out loud, right? So now I see myself, I say my name out loud. It dropped almost in half again, down to 8%, 14 down to 8%. And those are phenomenal things, right? So not a ton of regulation going on, simply just a self-awareness. I remember who I am, and a little more, this is me reaching into a candy bowl. And I remember who I am, who I'm supposed to be. That's the real me. The real me is the one that I'm trying to be. The real me isn't the one that I'm, when I just let my gut hang out. That's the bad me, right? Christians might call it the flesh, right? We have this old term about that. But the real me stays intact, in place more when I'm rested, when I'm self-aware, all these things. And now I'm set up to be the real me. So in the interview process, how coachable are they? Can I put a mirror in front of them and they actually look in this thing? Are they one that's going to go from from doing the wrong thing to the right thing? Or are they going to insist on doing the wrong thing? Or are they going to push back on accountability? Are they going to push back on the transparency things? So those are things to look for.
Dr. Cloud talks about, you use the mirror idea. He uses the analogy of shining a light. So when you shine the light on the truth, the facts, the details, do they accept that as input and then change their behavior? And he classifies that as a wise person. Or when the light comes, do they try to deflect the light? Like, well, it's really that person's fault. Or do they somehow try to shield themselves from the light or deflect the light? And he calls that person foolish.
Yes.
And then there's another, but you have to get his book or watch this video. But so as you're interviewing this person, we talked about paying attention to where they are, how they discern, how they react, how coachable or teachable are they. Is it one of those, as a leader, do you go ahead and take the best person you can get? Do you just not hire at all? I mean, like, you do got to ship product.
You do.
Right. So
Absolutely do.
What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah. So it depends, I think. Some of it's on the size of the team, right? So if I've only got one person that I can put on my team, I've got to get a high performer there, right? Because I've got a single point of failure. So I'm restricted there. If I've got 10 people on my team, that now there's some different schools of thought. The developmental school of thought says I can, if I've got a strong team here and I bring somebody who's coachable, right? And they may be back here, whether it be technically or whatever the case may be, but they're coachable. So they come and still have a good attitude. So I'm not talking about people who have bad attitude. I'm talking about people who are coachable, right? Because attitudes especially are contagious. Low performance is contagious. Great attitudes are contagious as well. So now I can tolerate somebody who may be here but trajectorying up, right? And if I can create a culture where my teams constantly have somebody who's being coached and mentored up, and we know how to be good coaches and mentors as a whole, and this person is coachable and knows how to be a good mentee. Now I've got built-in pipeline, right? I don't even have to have programs in place that teach. I mean, I should, but I'm naturally developing people. I can now hire somebody who's technically not taking a salary, not ready for a salary that's way up here. And so I can have a more diverse team from the standpoint of experience.
Mm.
And as long as so I'm looking for that coachability and that type of thing. And so I think the size of our team matters.
Mm.
I think the maturity of the rest of the team matters as well. So if I want this type of culture, I have to now develop that in the rest of my team. So that means I can't be the only one on the team that's trauma informed.
Mm.
I can start developing everyone else to be trauma informed. And essentially all that can mean is I want all of you to be self-aware more.
Mm-hmm.
Can you look in the mirror? Can you be presented with the mirror more? Can you start to regulate better? Can you put yourself through your own growth and your own development? Can we repair things, right? Are we resilient to messes and brokenness, right? I've been in a meeting before, a senior executive sitting in a meeting and wanted me present for that meeting. And this individual, as soon as the meeting started, just started laying into this other person. I'm like, holy smokes, what's going on? And of course, the other person became very defensive, and it was one of the ugliest meetings I'd ever been in. Right? And I'm like, well, what happened? What was that all about? It's like, see, I knew she was going to be that way. I'm like, well, no kidding. Like, you came in with your guns blazing, right? Just about anybody's going to pull their guns back out too, right? And so, is that person coachable now? Like, well, okay, let's talk a little bit about lids being flipped. Let's talk a little bit about like what we were talking about today. Let's talk about the amygdala. Did you know what your amygdala is doing in that moment? You know what her amygdala is doing in that moment. So you start teaching a little bit so that we now as a team can be more trauma informed, is a way to put it. But we can be more resilient really as a team. We joke about, making a safe space, how that may not be a good idea to just have a safe space to go and be safe. But really, the safer that we can make our workplace from the standpoint of I'm seen, I'm heard, I'm valued, and I'm understood, like all of those things, like as a person, in the context of we've got to get a job done, right? That's the thing that keeps the doors open, right? You and I talk about no margin, no mission all the time. We know we've got to have a margin. We know we have to make some widgets. We have to sell some things, and that's what puts food on the table for our families and enables so much of our life. Yet we're people doing that. So making a safe space at work, which sounds kind of soft and mushy, is really me being a better leader that understands people. That's really what it is. I understand you, and I care about you as a person, and I don't have to compromise the performance and the outcome of our business in order to understand and have compassion for somebody on the team. Actually, the opposite is true, that when people are seen and understood and developed and invested in, even through brokenness, broken things, they're going through a situation in their life, and they can get on a trajectory that goes through that. They come back more loyal. They come back with more passion for the organization, those things, and those become even more high performing folks. That's my own personal experience. The data shows that companies that live out those kinds of values, where you may call it a safe space, but it's really just a place where we value people. Like what kind of leadership decisions will I make if my people are as much of an outcome as the product or service that we're providing? So if I can take on that mindset of, yes, we've got to make these many things and service these many things, but I also have this responsibility for this many people. And if I can treat them as an outcome of at least my leadership, that they've grown, that they've developed, they've transformed, they've gotten better, whatever way I choose to look at that them as a person, that they become an outcome as well. They will almost always produce these business outcomes that I'm trying to get to, rather than these are priority, the business outcomes are priority, and I end up spending my people. And they're not my people. I end up just spending people, right? Through, you only last a few years. Like, you can only handle the stress or handle my leadership. or whatever it is, right? You end up spending people like you spend money and natural resources. You're going through the human resources just like everything else. That may be a sign that that leader can be looking more as the human outcome as much as the product or service
You
outcome.
talked about focusing on the people, and the quality comes, right? Or the service or the demand for your product comes. A few times as you were talking, and I don't know the story intimately well, but some years ago, one of the top people at Chick-fil-A was being interviewed. And the interviewer says, well, basically what I don't understand is, how does a company that's selling chicken produce, such quality people? And so that was kind of the line of questioning. And this leader says, well, that's simple. We see ourselves as a leadership company that sells chicken. So, basically,
Powerful,
we're focused on the people. We just happen to sell chicken as we're trying to train the people to do good customer service, to be aware of what's going on in other people's lives as they walk in the door. If they're grumpy, it's probably because something's not gone well that day for them, or if they're sitting by themselves at a table, don't assume it's because they want to be by themselves. Maybe they do, but maybe they just lost their best friend, in a car accident last week, and they're still processing that. So I think anybody that's ever been to Chick-fil-A, whether you appreciate what they stand for or not, generally would say that's probably the best run fast food. The people are very kind. They use, fancy words that you usually hear in fancy hotels. You tend to think of their employees as higher end employees. And it's because they've got this paradigm that we're a leadership training company that will do so by selling chicken.
Right.
And I think to your point earlier, that, is if we focus on the people, then the quality comes, the sales come, the transactions come, if we focus on that culture.
Yeah. The best motivators, the best innovation, creativity comes from the inside out. We can't force it from the outside in. Like, that's another boundaries thing, right? As much as I can't force you to do anything. But the reality is, when I invest on the inside of my people, that sounds kind of weird, I guess, but when you invest on the inside of people, you get the passion from the inside to tap into that, not by manipulating, but genuinely developing people. They're the only ones who can bring the energy that we need to go do hard things, to go do difficult things, and so investing them in that. I was thinking of one of the most impactful learning experiences for me was when I was coaching. I tried to coach all of my boys' basketball teams during elementary school and middle school. I'm not a great coach, but it was an opportunity for me to be with them. They were, parent coached leagues, and this particular year, my son's team was horrible. It was bad. I mean, it wasn't just like below 500. It was trauma inducing, right? I was praying that these kids were not going to have to go through therapy later in life because of how bad they were getting beaten. And it's a great team when the highlight of the week is practice. Like, oh, that was a fun practice, and nobody says anything about the games or anything. And so we've got 2 games left, and I'm thinking through this, really praying, like, God, I hope these kids don't have to go through therapy. Is there anything I can do? Like, can't make these kids better, right? And about half the team, this was their first season to play, and they were, in higher middle school. So at that level, I mean, if it's your first season, I mean, you're going to get crushed. And so what came to mind, was I came to each kid and I handed each one a Post-it with their own personal goals on there. So I said, we are not going to look at the scoreboard at all. We're all going to play a new game during this game. And so, Bobby, I want you to make 5 passes, and I want 3 of them to be bounce passes. Okay, that's your goal. And Johnny, I want you to take 6 shots. Okay, and I want 3 of them to be 3-pointers. I want you to just launch them up. But I want 3 of them to be layups. Right. And so, just playing to each kid what their particular strengths were, and said, we're not going to look at the scoreboard at all. This is your game, and I want each of you can win this game today. I'm going to give you an opportunity for every one of you to win this game today. And so we're out there playing, the kids are, having fun. They're running up and down the court, and they're kind of yelling over at me, saying, "Hey, I've only got 2 more passes to go, coach." And they're excited, and they're knocking off their goals. And we're sitting here in third quarter, and we look up, and we're like 2 points down, and we're like, "Oh my gosh, we're actually about to win this game." And the kids saw it too. They looked up, and they actually started shifting the way that they were playing. And all of a sudden, they saw the scoreboard and like, "Oh, there's a chance for us to win up there." And they started playing differently, the way they had been, right? And like, it was just an eye opener for me to, as a leader, if I can understand the game that my team is best suited for. And it doesn't mean that we have to actually go play a different game. We were still out on the court. We were still out there playing basketball, but paid much more attention to each person. They felt seen. They felt heard. They felt encouraged. A coach was behind me. I got permission to shoot a 3-pointer, right? And usually I would tell him, "You shoot a 3-pointer, you're doing push-ups if you missed the thing," right? Because I didn't want him to have bad form and things like that. They got permission. They got encouragement. They felt this clear identity of what their role was, and the team was all behind them too. "Yeah, all right, man. Hey, you need to get another pass. Pass me the ball, and I'll pass you the ball back." They were all of a sudden helping each other achieve their goals, and lo and behold, that was the thing that we needed to do to play better as a team. So that's like one of those lessons that'll stick with me forever. And how do I find ways to do that in the workplace? Because it works. It does work. And it worked like this. It wasn't like, "Here's a 6-month program. At the end of 6 months, I hope that we have improved our productivity by 5.7%. This was like instantaneous. It was a switch for these kids. And I've experienced that same kind of switch in myself when I know that I'm playing the right game, that I'm in my sweet spot, or that I'm encouraged. I've got permission. I've got confidence that I'm in the right place. Like when all those things just come in line, high performing, you get in the flow. And as a leader, knowing how to get somebody from their lid being flipped, and then more, it's all the same things. The same things that help us get somebody's lid unflipped and seen and heard, feeling safe, are the same things that get them into this place where they're playing their own game in a high-performing way and making the whole team succeed.
That's good. That's really good. Well, as always, I've enjoyed having you on the show. Great words of wisdom. Thanks for your insight.
I love being here. Thank you for being such a good friend. I don't know if the listeners know, but you are a friend that is always there, and you've been there for a lot of times for me. And maybe sometime we'll have to talk about friendship. But everybody needs to have a really good friend, or a few really good friends, and I'm fortunate enough to have at least one. And you need to be a good friend to do that. I feel like you're usually a better friend than I am in return.
I think so.
And but I want to say publicly that, and maybe we'll get to talk about friendship sometime.
Maybe.
It'd be a good topic.
It'd be humbling, though. I'm proud of how humble I am.
Well,
I'll put that on record too.
You're pretty humble. I'm a little bit more humble than you are, but
we can have a podcast about being humble. How to lead with humility and do it better than everybody else.
Perfect. And write a book.
Thanks, brother. Love you, man.
Love you too, Joel.